Every year, thousands of people die without leaving a will, and seemingly with no next of kin. But often, there is a distant relative who unwittingly stands to inherit, and that's where the heir hunters come in. On today's programme, when a shy and reclusive woman passes away, she leaves a fortune and a mystery behind her.
She didn't really leave the house, and she didn't have any friends outside other than my wife or myself.
And an unsolved case worth over £100,000 throws up more questions than it does answers.
She wouldn't talk about anything a lot. It was her secret, you know what I mean?
And we'll have details of some of the hundreds of unclaimed estates. Could you be in line for a windfall? In the UK, about 2/3 of people do not have a will, and therefore leave no record of their last wishes. If they die and leave an estate, and an obvious relative cannot be found, then the money automatically defaults to the government, who last year made £18 million in unclaimed estates. Heir hunters must leave no stone unturned, and there are over 30 companies competing to track down beneficiaries and put them in touch with a fortune they never knew existed. With so much money at stake and working for a commission, it's a lucrative business, and therefore competition can be fierce.
It's not going to beat me. I refuse to let it beat me.
Fraser and Fraser have handled over £100 million worth of inheritance in the last 10 years alone. The search for an heir can take them anywhere, so the team must exhaust every line of inquiry in their hunt for the beneficiaries. It's 7 a.m. on Thursday, and Fraser and Fraser is already a hive of activity. This is the morning the Treasury releases its weekly list of unclaimed estates. Neil and Tony are scanning the cases to see if any seem worth investigating.
So the case we're going to start running with is Margaret Porter. Maiden name is Nye, N-Y-E, which is quite a good name to research. She's from Carshalton or Sutton area, Surrey. Haven't really got a very good address, haven't really got a very good age.
The team have very little information to go on, so they use census and birth, death and marriage certificates to build a family tree for the deceased. Going back generations and generations, the team hope to uncover potential heirs to an estate. Margaret Porter, maiden name Nye, passed away in June 2008, leaving behind an estate worth an estimated £25,000. Jack McAuliffe was her neighbour for 15 years and knew her as a private person.
Margaret was a very slight, frail lady. She was timid. She didn't really leave the house, and she didn't have any friends outside other than my wife or myself.
Although Margaret spent the last few years of her life alone, she had been happily married for over 50 years to Harry Porter. As far as Jack knew, the couple met before the Second World War and were wartime sweethearts during the conflict. Margaret worked in a munitions factory in the north of England, and Harry served in Burma. When the war ended, they got married but had no children. During the time Jack knew the couple, it seemed Margaret relied on Harry a great deal.
Margaret and Harry were very close to each other. He used to do a lot of things for her, shopping, some cleaning and housework and what have you indoors, and they seemed to live for each other.
After Harry died, Margaret had the help of her brother and sister, Ernest and Eileen, and when they passed away in 2006, Jack and his late wife helped where they could.
If my wife baked a cake or bread pudding, some would always go over there. Often at my expense. The thing that Margaret really enjoyed, it was a little dabble on the weekly lottery, in the hope, of course, that she became a millionairess. Needless to say, it never happened.
Margaret spent the last few years of her life in a nursing home in Carshalton, Surrey, before passing away aged 86, leaving behind an estate worth an estimated £25,000. By 7:20 a.m, the team are piecing the story together. With the case seeming to be based in Surrey, Neil and Tony think Bob Barrett will be their local man on the ground.
Hello, Bob Barrett.
Hi, Bob.
It's time to call upon the expertise of the travelling air hunters. Throughout the UK, Frasers have a team of researchers on standby who are able to hit the road at a moment's notice. Their job is to track down vital clues and information on the case and eventually sign up the rightful heirs. They have to work fast, as a rival air hunting company is never far behind.
Pleased to meet you.
Bob is one of the team of travelling air hunters and is based in the home counties. Tony sends him to Kingston Register Office to find the death certificate of the deceased and any information he can find on Margaret's parents. By 9 a.m, Tony has found the details of the births and deaths of Margaret's siblings, Ernest and Eileen, and a phone number for Margaret's sister-in-law.
I'm hoping that if your husband turned out to be of the right family, then, he would have been entitled, and therefore that entitlement that he would have would pass to any children that you might have. Now, to be quite frank, I don't know if you had any children. Oh, you didn't know, that's a shame. But it wouldn't actually pass to yourself, because you wouldn't be a blood relative, you see.
From this call, Tony learns that neither Margaret's brother nor sister had any children, so her estate will not pass to nieces or nephews. This means they will have to start looking for cousins.
Have you any idea where your mother-in-law was actually born? In Ireland. Do you know what a maiden name was? Gundry, I think. Oh, right, okay. It's a pretty unusual name, isn't it?
This conversation has given Tony a very useful lead.
She thought that the mother of the deceased was born in Ireland. And so we'll be asking our Irish agent if they can identify the birth in Ireland. We'll just wait and see. But we're making some headway, so it's looking fairly positive at the moment.
Margaret Nye was the daughter of Elizabeth Gundry and Ernest Arthur Nye. Margaret married Harry Porter, but they had no children. Elizabeth and Arthur had 2 more children, Ernest and Eileen, who both married but also had no children.
Call for Tony, Parks 603. Bob Barrett for Tony, 602.
Hello.
Bob calls with the information he's gleaned from the marriage certificate of Margaret's parents.
30th of April 1921.
Yeah. Tell me what the father is.
Charles Nye.
Yeah.
So that's what you wanted to hear, I think.
What about the mother?
Elizabeth Gundry.
Yeah.
21, spinster.
Thanks, bye.
With Bob's update, Neil and Tony can start a family tree. Using the 1911 census, Neil notices an interesting trend on Margaret's father's side.
The names we can read are Violet, Daisy, Rose and Ivy. And obviously they're all named after flowers or plants, which is it's a trend we've seen, I think, once or twice before, but it's still quite rare.
Margaret's father, Ernest, was the son of Charles Nye and Emma Hagger. So far, we know they had 5 children and a penchant for flowers, naming 4 of their daughters Violet, Daisy, Rose and Ivy.
I'm a particular fan of flowers in names. My daughter's called Rose. We've got a Rose here. They started Violet, Daisy, Rose, and then I think maybe decided to abandon the whole flower thing. Maybe people started to notice.
Ivy Nye married George Milam in 1917. Neil is looking into whether they had children who could be heirs.
I just looked at the stem of Ivy, Ivy Hannah Nye, and I've just got a son of hers up to date. He's in the Hounslow area, and his name's George, after his father, George. He's not a flower. His sister's called Joan, and that's not after a flower either. Joan after Joan of Arc, and George after the Slayer of the Dragon.
I don't think Neil is going to be calling any of his children by flowers. He's not so keen.
If I have a child, I'll name him after myself.
Neil. Long standard tradition will be called Neil.
Neil updates Bob Barrett with his discovery of George Milam, Ivy's son, hoping he can pay the potential heir a visit and sign him up.
I'll give you a treat, and you can make your way over to Hounslow.
Hounslow, right.
Okay.
I'm on the way to Hounslow now to see a gentleman who's in his 90s, a paternal first cousin of our deceased, and is an heir.
Back in London, the paternal side of the tree just keeps growing. As the tree expands, it's a timely reminder of what a sheltered and lonely life Margaret led. Despite having so many relatives, all living quite locally to her Surrey home. With so many stems to research, Aisha has been brought in to help, and she's working on another floral name, this time an English rose.
So Rose marries a William Mitchell. She marries in Croydon, but before she married, she was a servant in Wimbledon and Epsom. I found that out from the censuses. And I found a death for her in Merton, which isn't too far from Croydon. So we're trying to find children in that sort of area, but nothing's really springing out at the moment. So I'm just going to have a look through them.
It's not been too tricky so far, so while Gareth's at lunch, let's try and finish it off.
But Neil might have spoken too soon. Bob has arrived at George Milam's house, and it's not good news.
If it's to do with the... I've already seen somebody about this.
About... Oh, with regard to...
The person they're looking for regarding the will.
Right, so we can't interest you in doing business with us. Sorry to have disturbed you.
Quite all right.
Bye-bye now. And I hope at the end of the day it's all worthwhile for you. Bye-bye. So, one of our competitors got there first and has signed that particular heir, so I better get back and tell them the good news in the office.
Hiya.
Hello, Neil. The good news and bad news.
Right, did you get any family information?
No, he was... didn't really want to speak to me at all. He's already... it's all too much for him, and he's an elderly old gent, etc.
I'll give you something else later. Goodbye. Tone?
Yeah. Yep. Hello. How may I assist you?
Storm clouds are brewing overhead, and Tony's cheery mood proves all too brief.
That's a bit of a bummer, isn't it?
With the competition hot on their heels, Tony gets straight on the phone to another potential heir. But is he too late?
Hello. Oh, hello, Mrs. Nye. Oh, you have indeed. Well, indeed, yes. Well, we're obviously another company, you see. You just had a call from somebody else about it.
Yeah, but I've also got something else for us. So this
Oh, yes, indeed, yes. That's another research company, you see.
But Tony won't be going down without a fight.
We just got to go back and re-look at our research and work some other stems up. So, there we go. You know, so, it's just one of those cases where you expect to get competition on it, and that's occurring. But, you know, I have every confidence in the team, and I'm sure that we'll triumph in the end. Yeah, I know what you mean. Hello. Right, so what I'm looking at is the death.
With no sign of Margaret's mother's birth in Ireland, Tony asks Bob to collect her death certificate to see if it might offer any clues.
September 1979 in Merton, right.
So could you sort of try pointing that way?
What was her maiden name?
Gundry, Gundry, in theory.
OK.
All right, talk to you later.
Cheers.
Bye.
Got something to do now, then, which is to go to Merton Register Office.
We can't find the birth of the mother of the deceased as of yet, so I'll be getting the death to see if it gives a place of birth on it. It might not do. OK, but we were told that she was born in Ireland, but we can't find it in Ireland, so perhaps she's born in the middle between Ireland and Scotland and born in the Isle of Man. I don't know. But she doesn't seem to be born in Scotland either. So perhaps she's born over here, or perhaps the name's wrong or incorrectly reproduced or whatever. I don't know. I'm trying to deal with this. OK? Thank you. But either way...
Coming up on Heir Hunters, good detective work uncovers an enormous family for the reclusive Margaret.
We've done Ernest, Frederick, Charles, Violet and Ivy.
Yeah, I think there was about 13 of them altogether.
There was quite a few, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Hoopers, based in London, are one of the oldest heir hunting companies in the country. Chairman Mike Tringham has over 35 years' experience as a genealogist. Despite decades of heir hunting and a dedicated team assisting him, one case in particular has left Mike stumped.
It's this kind of case which really gets the juices flowing. The more frustrating it is, the more difficult it is, the more impossible it seems to solve, the more you want to solve it.
This was the case of Claire Hunt, a friend to many and lifelong partner to Herbert Hunt, but she proved to be somewhat of an enigma after her death. Claire Hunt was thought to have been born in the early 1920s, possibly in Blackpool. Unfortunately, for the first few decades of her life, very little is known about her. It is not until she met Herbert Hunt in the early 50s that her life can be more easily pieced together. Herbert's younger sister Lillian remembers Claire well and met her for the first time when she herself was only 6 years old.
She was so bubbly and appearance was all perfect. Her hair was always done nice. Just as something that you look up to and you think, oh, you know, it's nice to see someone like it.
Claire and Herbert's love affair was one that would last a lifetime. But despite knowing Claire for well over 50 years, Lillian was never able to paint a clear picture of Claire's life before Herbert.
Claire had told me when I was younger that her parents died when her sister died in a big car accident. Whether Claire was in the accident or not, I haven't got no idea. She says she was the only one that was left. And she had to survive for herself. So she wouldn't talk about anything a lot. She thought that was very, like, it was her secret, you know what I mean?
Despite her tragic start in life, it seems Claire found true happiness when she met Herbie. After courting for a while, they left Kent and set up home together in Blackpool.
Herbie was in the council in Maidstone, and we had a transfer from Maidstone to Blackpool. I think that was her home roots, so she always liked to be there. And they moved up there and they stayed to the day they died.
Under the bright lights of Blackpool, Herbie and Claire took advantage of all that seaside life had to offer in the 1960s.
They must have liked bingo very much, because they would always go in. They liked the nightlife. They didn't have any children to have to worry about. So I think they went out a lot together and enjoyed themselves and went abroad and everything like that.
And it was the couple's shared love of bingo which gave them a great deal of pleasure, especially in their late years when they'd retired. Graham Sanderson-Roberts, who worked in the bingo hall, remembers the couple fondly.
The doors opened at 10:30. Claire Burt would probably be in about 11:15. As soon as they came in, it was 2 cups of tea, 2 portions of chips. Always in the same seat. They sat in the same seat for nearly 13 years. They'd be talking to the friends. It was just a routine, the same thing every day.
On its own, number 2.
And one day in 2002, Claire and Herbert's years of dedication to the bingo balls paid off.
Number 2. One lucky winner.
I was there when the results came through, when they shouted, and they were actually told that time they'd actually won just close to £70,000. The atmosphere was electric. Everybody was cheering, they were clapping. It was just an ecstatic moment for them in their lives.
Despite winning such a huge sum of money, the couple decided to keep news of their success to themselves, and their passion for the game couldn't be extinguished.
They never changed. They were still there 5 afternoons a week. It wasn't the money they were looking at. It was the atmosphere of the club, the people, the friends all around them. You know, it never changed them.
Sadly, after over 50 years of partnership and just 3 years after their bingo win, Herbie passed away, and Claire was overwhelmed by grief.
I think it was very hard for her. He looked after her for a long time, and then all of a sudden he's not there. And she must have been, well, really heartbroken.
Just 8 months after Herbert's death, Claire too passed away in a care home. Later on Air Hunters, Mike struggles to uncover official and vital evidence of Claire's early life, which could hold the key to her past.
We looked in all records available to us in the UK and abroad, and unfortunately we were never able to discover a record of this marriage.
For every case that is cracked, there are still many thousands which remain a mystery. These cases sit on the Treasury's unsolved list and can remain there for up to 30 years. The estates can range wildly in value, from £5,000 to many millions, with the rightful heirs completely unaware of the windfall they could claim. Today, we've got 2 cases heir hunters have so far failed to solve. Could you have the answer? Could you be in line to inherit? Margaret Pike passed away in March 2005 in London. A beneficiary to her estate still cannot be found, almost 5 years after her death. Did you know her? Might you be able to help solve the case? Jean Rawlinson died in Peckham, London in June 2006, leaving no will and an estate that is waiting to be claimed. Could she be a distant relative of yours? Might you be the missing link in this mystery? Heir hunters Hoopers are given many cases from the Treasury's list, but other cases can be referred to them, and one such case was that of Claire Hunt. Mike Tringham has been investigating the case for the 3 years since Claire died, just 8 months after her partner Herbert Hunt in Blackpool.
It started off as being pretty routine, or so we thought, but once we got started we soon realised that it wasn't as simple as and straightforward as the normal run-of-the-mill case.
The couple had managed to accrue quite a nest egg in their time together, and with the help of their £70,000 bingo win, they left behind £120,000 in their joint account. Because Herbert had predeceased Claire and the money was held in the couple's joint bank account, the estate passed to Claire, but sadly, the couple had not made a will. As the estate was entirely in Claire's name, only her blood relatives would be able to inherit. So Mike began trying to trace Claire's family, and this is where Claire's secrecy about her early life began to cause complications.
There was a date of birth on the death certificate, but neither her place of birth nor her maiden name was given. That's not unusual, particularly in the cases that land on our desk. We started looking at possibilities of identifying her birth, and we drew a blank, unfortunately.
Usually Mike would begin by building a family tree, using a name and birth, death and marriage certificates in order to trace parents and any blood relatives. Working through the generations, often a beneficiary can be found who would be eligible to inherit. In the case of Claire Hunt, 3 years after research began, Mike is still no closer to a resolution. On Claire's death certificate, it stated she was born in 1921, but frustratingly for Mike, this conflicted with hospital records found from the 80s, which stated she was born in 1925.
We looked at many of the females born, particularly in England and Ireland and Scotland, by the name of Claire, who were born in either 1921 or 1925, but none of them fitted the bill.
Mike also drew a blank when looking for Herbert and Claire's marriage certificate, raising the possibility that the couple never wed. In fact, none of Herbert's family had attended any ceremony.
I just assumed they were married because when they used to come down, they used to share the room together, so I just assumed they were married, because I don't think my mum would let them do that if they wasn't.
The question of whether the couple were married had major ramifications. Aside from the couple's £120,000 in their joint account, Herbert had left behind some money of his own, £12,000. If Herbert and Claire had been married, then this £12,000 would have gone to Claire. If they hadn't, then Herbert's personal sum would go to his blood relatives, such as Lillian. So Mike needed to prove the couple's union one way or another.
The simplest explanation is that, she took up with a Mr. Herbert Hunt, so therefore she had obviously taken on his name.
Mike's theory seems to have been supported by his discovery of some records from the 90s.
This is a form filled in by Herbert Hunt, and it's got here marital status, it's left blank. Birth of wife, left blank. And then further down, it says name of account, Herbert S. Hunt and Claire Hunt. And alongside the name Claire Hunt, it says, not his wife, spoke to Bob Ledbetter, 10th of September, 92. That's obviously an official in the bank, and they've confirmed, clarified, that Claire Hunt is not his wife.
With no real idea whether Hunt was Claire's actual surname, Mike was unable to even start a family tree. Did Claire use a false name? Had she ever been known by another name? In a further twist, additional records from the Pensions Office suggested Claire may have married another man, Bernard Valentine in 1951, before meeting Herbie. If this marriage took place, Bernard, or any children they may have had, would be heirs. If Mike could find evidence of this union, the case could be cracked.
We looked in all records available to us in the UK and abroad, and unfortunately we were never able to discover a record of this marriage, if indeed it took place.
No, I wouldn't have said she was married before, and I'll stake my life on that. She was always Herbie's.
I have this theory that perhaps she did marry Mr. Valentine, and the marriage didn't work out, and she walked out, and not long after she met Herbert Hunt, and because she was already married and had walked out on her husband, she couldn't marry Herbert, and that situation remained for the rest of her life.
With no further leads, Mike has hit another dead end on this case, and the question of exactly who Claire Hunt was remains a mystery.
At the moment, I'm at a loss as to where we go from here. I hope someone might remember her, might recall who Claire was, might have gone to school with her, might have met her, might have been married to her. Who knows?
Mike has searched for over 3 years and is no closer to solving the case. Might you have the missing piece of the jigsaw? Do you recognise Claire from her photograph? Do you remember her marrying a Bernard Valentine? Perhaps you knew her under a different name when she was in her 20s and early 30s. Even the tiniest piece of information might hold the key to unlocking this case and returning Claire's estate of £120,000 to the rightful beneficiary. The Frasers team are investigating the case of Margaret Porter, who died in 2008 in Surrey, leaving an estimated estate of £25,000. Despite leading a quiet life, Margaret had married Harry Porter after the Second World War, and it was a union that would span over 50 years. When Harry passed away in 1998, Margaret became increasingly introverted and shy, and her friend Jack always considered her a reclusive person.
She was just one of these people, I suppose, who, was in her own little world.
Although Margaret lived in her own private world, the team are uncovering dozens of family members who live close by. And while they're still in need of a breakthrough on the maternal side of the tree, the paternal side is growing by the minute.
Minnie, age 22, born Middlesex. Wasn't according to that.
Gareth has found a clue on the census that reveals a sibling who had lain undiscovered until now.
When we found the census of Violet in Ipswich, she is living as a housemaid, but she's also living with a Minnie Nye, who's also a housemaid, who's got to be a sister. I mean, it would be, the coincidence of two Nyes living together in both born in the same sort of area. So we're guessing that she's a sister that we didn't know about. So I'm going to see what happens to Minnie. But yeah, she's definitely going to be an aunt of the deceased that we need to work.
And Aisha has some additions for the family tree too. She has found a brother on the paternal side who married and had children.
I found... we can't find Shirley, so I found her daughter, married her off, and got her up to date on the telephone.
Ernest and his 4 sisters also had another sister, Alice Minnie, and a brother, Frederick. Frederick married Mary, and they had a daughter, Shirley. She later had a child of her own who stands to inherit. Alice Minnie had 2 children, Robert and Violet. Violet died without kin, but Robert fathered 6 children who will all be heirs.
Tony, I have Bob Barrett on 619.
Can you get that?
Bob Barrett on 619 for Tony.
Bob has an update for the team. He has the death certificate for Margaret's mother. Might this unlock the maternal side of the tree?
Elizabeth Nye, maiden name Gundry, born 13th of January 1900, in Wimbledon, not Ireland at all.
Even with this new information, Elizabeth Gundry's birth details still can't be found. Something's not right here. It's beginning to look like a mistake has been made in the birth records of Margaret's mother.
It's not in Wimbledon at all, and the son who informed on the death has got it wrong. The date of birth is wrong, or was a wrong spelling on it, so it's a bit of guesswork at the moment.
The team must solve this puzzle. Without Elizabeth's correct date of birth, they cannot access her siblings, and cousins Margaret had, who could be heirs. During another check of the 1911 census, they have a breakthrough and find Elizabeth and her siblings.
We were looking for the birth. We haven't found the birth. What we found is 1911 census, which indicates we have people born in Wimbledon, born in Dublin, born back in Wimbledon, and then around. So it's just it probably should have been found earlier and would have if we'd been working it fully, but we got told it was an island from a fairly good source. Couldn't find a birth. Believed it was an island, and we've concentrated on the easier bit first, so we've got to catch up on this side now. Looks like we've got 6 children on that, so we've got 5 stems to work up.
Elizabeth Gundry was also from a big family. She had 5 brothers and sisters: Margaret, Kathleen, James, Walter and Mary. If they had any children, they would be heirs to Margaret's estate. Neil rushes to tell Tony of their breakthrough so he can call another potential heir.
We're all getting dynamic again, are we? Where we go?
Netta.
But I think it's a good try out for first off.
Yeah.
Hello?
Oh, hello. Sorry to trouble. Is that Mrs. Randall?
Although Mrs. Randall cannot inherit, her late husband George was a cousin of Margaret. This means any children Mrs. Randall may have had could be beneficiaries.
Okay. And I'm hoping that you did have children. Oh, 3. Oh, that's good. Right, OK. So your 3 children would, we think, be entitled to the share of an estate of somebody who has died quite recently.
It sounds as though the news is pretty good, because from the indication on this, it looks as though we're ahead of competition on that, which is great news.
The contact addresses for your children, so
we should have found this before lunch, but obviously with no one looking at it until later, it's the reason we're slightly behind, so it's good news, we're catching up.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, I can check all these out, yeah. There's a cousin of your husband called Kathy, and she's married to Les Voice, and they live in Guildford. Right, we'll find that and we're working it backwards. OK then, all right, that's lovely. Thanks ever so much.
Elizabeth's sister Mary married Frederick Randall, and they had 2 children, one of whom is living and would be an heir. Their other child, George, has now passed away, but was married to Netta Randall, and they had 3 children who would all be heirs. Netta has told Tony about a cousin of her husband's, Catherine. She would also be an heir, so the team are keen to track her down. Meanwhile, away from the hustle and bustle of the office, Bob has been having a somewhat less dynamic day.
Waiting. There's a bit of waiting here and a bit of waiting there. So just for change, I'm doing a bit of waiting. Waiting for a phone call now from Tony.
While Bob plays the waiting game, the office is in full flow.
Oh, hello, Mrs. Voice.
What, still on the phone?
She's on the other line at the moment, I'm afraid.
No problem.
1939, yeah?
Bob is waiting outside the home of a potential heir, but he needs some details from Tony before he can proceed. Finally, Gareth gets in touch.
Would you like the tree there?
And steers him in the right direction.
On the mother's side, we would seem to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, probably 10, 11, 12, 13 heirs. And on the other side, there's about sort of 5 or 6, I think. So, we could have 15, 16, perhaps more people entitled in this matter. So it does take a lot of organising, and obviously we've still got a lot to backtrack on, and it's now sort of 5:10 and I'm fed up and I want to go home.
But it's not home time for Bob just yet. He's still pounding the streets in his hunt for an heir.
Must be further down.
Having found the correct address, will his final throw of today's dice produce an heir he can sign up?
Well, after all that, there's nobody in.
After a day of frustrations and mixed fortunes, Bob goes home and will pick up his search again tomorrow morning. It's a new day and a fresh start. Bob is still chasing down heirs to Margaret Porter's estate. He's come to see a potential beneficiary, but nobody seems to be at home.
It's one of those jobs where no one's in.
After confirming with a neighbour that this is the correct address, Bob leaves a note.
I'm off to Camberley now to try and see another heir. I say another heir, it's my third attempt. A bit of luck this chap will be in because I think he's in his 80s. So, pretty good chance he won't be out of work anyway. Hello.
It looks as though Bob has the right address, but has he managed to sign up an heir?
What a smashing old gent. Signed an agreement with us, so at least I found someone in, which is good, and I better ring and tell him in the office that I've had some success.
And now his luck's changed, Bob heads to an appointment made by the office with another possible beneficiary in Kent, Francis Mitchell and his wife and daughter.
Francis, rather than Frank.
He always calls himself Frank, but officially it's Francis.
The person that died is, in fact, a cousin. Have you heard an Uncle Ernest?
Ernie, yes.
Yeah, it was one of his children who died.
Oh.
Now, I warned you, one of the things I'm going to ask you is the date of your marriage. And sometimes the men are getting in a dreadful position. He's just sitting next to me and I can't remember it.
Was it 45?
No, it was the 16th of March, 46.
Oh.
There we are, you're fired. That's it, yeah. And your mother's maiden name? No. Could I ask you now about your mother's brothers and sisters, so aunts and uncles on your mother's side?
One of it's Ernie, Frederick.
Fred.
Charlie. He had a boy, son.
Do you remember his name? Charlie's boy?
Charlie, he was called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything else about him?
Was he the one who only had one leg?
Yeah, he only had one leg.
Oh, right. What, did he lose it in the war or something? Or?
No, he lost it playing football.
Did he?
Yeah.
Anyone else? We've done Ernest, Frederick, Charles, Violet and Ivy.
I think there was about 13 of them all
There was
together.
quite a few, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Ida?
Ida, yes.
Do you remember Ida?
Ida.
Did she marry?
Yes.
Any idea of a name?
Mr. Yeoman.
It's an unusual one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Any children that you
No
can...
children.
No. And there was we think there may have been a couple more that died as children, but oh, well, I think we did quite well on that.
It's been a very successful visit for Bob. Frasers will help Frank make a claim for part of Margaret's £25,000 estate, and hopefully he won't be the only one in line for a windfall.
Right. Take my glasses off, otherwise I'll fall over when I stand up. Thanks very much. Nice to meet you.
All right, and you.
Bye-bye now. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Cheerio. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for Tony and the team, it's been a successful case, and it seems all their effort was worth it.
It was rather difficult to get going, but it's pleased to be able to say that it now looks as if it will all come together. We've got, I think, getting on for 30 years or so, which isn't a bad number. It's a manageable number. They will, all, I believe, hopefully all get a reasonable sum of money. So, you know, it's nice to know that we've finally been able to get this one, well, almost wrapped up.
If you would like to find out more about how to build a family tree or write a will, go to bbc.co.uk.
A carpenter hit by the credit crunch goes in search of a better life for his family down under next on BBC One. Then a derelict folly in Bedfordshire that was abandoned for decades is brought back to life in Britain's empty homes at 11.